Hello, you're listening and watching Sarah Archer and episode 316 of the Speaking Club podcast. And I want to open the show this week with a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, who, this is pure coincidence, who was the author of the book that Heather Lillico chose as the one that had most impact on her life in last week's episode. And Thich Nhat Hanh was a pioneer in bringing mindfulness to the West. And he just happened to be the most quote that most resonated with me for this particular episode. And before I share the quote with you, I just want you to bear in mind that for me, as a speaker and a speaking coach, I want you to love your audience. When you love someone, the best thing you can offer is your presence. I started this podcast for two reasons. Because I want to help people recognize the power of stories and humor in speaking, and because I believe it's your message that counts, not the number of ums and ahs you use. There are some organizations that want to create robot speakers. They want you to sacrifice your personality in order to speak perfectly. But I want to let you know that you can be yourself and a sensational speaker. So, if you want to be a speaker that connects and engages authentically through stories, a speaker that gives value as well as a great performance, then welcome home. Hey, welcome to the show. How are you? How's your week going? Having a good one? How's your speaking going? Are you getting out there? Are you getting the gigs? Are you confident in your material? Are you sharing your message with the world? If not, do that. Don't just listen to the show. Implement. Get yourself out there. I am excited. I've got my actual play coming up next week. So that's keeping me busy and out of trouble. And lots of really exciting products also in the pipeline to share with you. I'll keep you posted on those. Now, today, let's switch to talk about today's show. Well, if any of these sound like you, then you are going to love this. Do you feel like your message is getting lost in a sea of jargon? Like you are really struggling to turn a complex or technical idea that makes absolute sense to you into something that connects with and is relatable with your audience. You know, something that I've touched on in the past, but particularly around tech stuff, this is going to be an absolute great episode for you. Or maybe the other thing that might resonate is that you're in a room with people and you're absolutely fine. But get in front of a camera and you lose the plot. You lose your personality. You don't know what to say. It just feels awkward and uncomfortable. And if any of those things resonate, then you are absolutely in the right place, because my guest on the podcast today is a lady called Loreta Tarozaite. And she is a TV journalist, an ex-TV journalist, who was moved from Lithuania to America. And she has been behind the camera, she's been on screen, and today she spends her time working with companies and C-suite execs to help them build their brand and leadership and executive presence, especially in front of the camera and around video storytelling. And she has got some amazing skills that she brings from the world of journalism and TV into this space, and she's going to be sharing some gold with you today. So without further ado, let's switch over to the interview with me and Loreta. Welcome to the Speaking Club, Loreta Tarozaite.
Thank you, Sarah. Looking forward to chatting with you today.
Likewise. Now, I wanted to start off talking a little bit about the past, because you began your career as a TV journalist in Lithuania, which is, we were talking about this because I'm going to be speaking in Lithuania in May, so my ears pricked up at that. But
Yeah.
I'm interested, first of all, in how your experiences as a journalist contributed to your approach to storytelling and communication, first of all.
Thank you for asking this question and for bringing me a little bit to the past. It feels like so many years ago that I was a news anchor and a news reporter back in Lithuania. I was very, very green back then, to be honest. I started my career very early in television. And I remember I was shadowing one of the more senior journalists on a documentary, episode that we were building. And I was just admiring how well she was extracting, information from the interviews and, just weaving in the story. And I think I was probably, I'm trying to remember, maybe in my last year or soon after graduating, university. Uh, and I was like, oh my God, I have no idea how to do this job. I remember thinking this way. The knowledge and that expertise came in way, way later in my career. I did not have really good coaching,
Mm,
through being a news anchor, a news reporter. Nobody really taught you. All my
mm,
knowledge came from the university sort of theoretical part of it. And then when I
mm,
was, working in television, nobody really guided me how to do things, how to be the best you can be, as an anchor or as a journalist. So a lot of it came from observation and sort of taking in the information, seeing how, let's say, news producers, news directors are thinking, how they're compiling all of the show together, and just really soaking it all in and applying it to myself. So what in the end it taught me is this, that asking questions, listening to answers is very important, and distilling the information to the core of the message is important, because airtime is expensive, on
mm,
television. So you have to be very precise, very short in how you tell the story so that it resonates and it's understood by the audience. So when I was working in the news department, specifically as a news anchor, I, alongside with news producers and directors, we would all be looking at this at the flood of information coming from different news, I guess, channels.
mm,
And the goal was to look for commonalities, to look, what's on a global scale is important, how those stories are being told by different news outlets, and then distill it to present it to, the audiences and
mm,
to the viewers. And clarity, of the information is something that I found was crucial in how you tell that story. So that translated over to me being a video producer, video storyteller. When I just started tapping, when I moved here into the United States, and many years ago, I figured, I will not be a news anchor here in the United States. Nobody's going to give me this opportunity, nor do I even believe it might be possibility. So I transformed the skills of being a journalist, a TV journalist in Lithuania, to video producing. And only in that moment, as I was building my business, as I was trying to discover the new me through new outlets, I realized, what I was good at.
mm.
And what kind of knowledge I brought from those experiences as a being on TV to, telling business video stories. And again, that's back to listening, asking questions, listening for answers, guiding, the story thread to
Mm.
concise, clear point, so that we're not taking up, massive amounts of time to deliver that message.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's really, there's some really key points there about being precise and stuff like that. What was interesting to me, and I don't know if it's different in Lithuania, but I find in the UK that there are two types of journalists, TV journalists, and I think this distinction is important in terms of there's listening to understand and listening to reply, and there seems to
Mm.
be two camps. There's definitely a group of people that I've seen on TV that have a point that they want to make, and regardless of the answer, they're going to kind of make that point. And then there's the others who are really listening to understand the situation, and maybe it depends on the guest and the approach. Is that something that happens? You sometimes get directed to make a point, or is that just something
Um,
unusual here?
when I moved to the United States, one thing I noticed that was very different is that the news here are like shows, you know.
Mm,
The hosts, they express their opinions, they blast the other side, they're very they're very outspoken about, where they stand with the views, with the thinking, with on different issues, and ideas, and that that
mm,
that that are, floating at any given time, in the country. And I remember watching the news and I was like, how are they even allowed to comment so bravely and so outspokenly? Because I was trained to not give out my where I stand, not
Yeah.
even my facial expressions were allowed to be made to show, indirectly through the body language what I feel about a certain message. So I was trained to be unbiased.
Mm.
And then come here to the United States, it's like a show. Everybody's commenting on everything. Everybody's saying bad things about stuff, or good things, depending, right, on the story. So where I stood, where I come from, from that type of training, for me, in working with business owners, entrepreneurs, and C-suite level, executives, it was important for me to understand the business, right? Because I could not help them get better in delivering the message if I did not understand the business. So I would give them the platform to talk and express what it is that they're trying to give an answer to. And then by listening and sort of comprehending and editing their message in my head, I'm like, oh, okay, I think that's what they're going with it. And that ties to the business that I'm aware of that we're trying to achieve, as a company. So I distill that information for them on the spot, so that kind of encapsulates the main idea of what you're trying to deliver, and then repeat it to them asking, is that what you are trying to say? And they're like, yes, that's exactly what we were trying to say. So now let's make it a 2-sentence, 3-sentence, version versus 5-minute version of that idea, So listening to me is crucial because, first of all, that's how people learn. And that's how I learn, by asking questions and then by understanding what the answer is. I learn about the business, I learn about technology this way, and I can help the executives and leaders to deliver that message more clearly because I understand it myself better.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's almost like translating from them into something that's more concrete and memorable using those skills that you picked up as a journalist. That's cool.
Yeah.
And it's a great segue, actually, because I wanted to next ask you about your work with B2B tech startups and companies that are in transition. I'm curious because I have an interest in this area too. What are the biggest communication mistakes that you see people making in these environments, and how can they fix them?
Yeah, we definitely overlap, in how we coach leaders, to be clear in how they communicate. To me, the words are always accompanied with visuals.
Mm.
So despite the message, or lack of clarity of the message, visuals is always like a piece of it. That just comes from TV, right?
Yeah.
So for example, if somebody is trying to communicate a story, and that is very prominent with technology type of leaders or people working in tech. They tend to use a lot of tech jargon,
Yeah.
acronyms, just throwing things in. They go out and about too deep, too geeky into things that nobody understands, and then I have to reel them back in. How does this tie to the story? How does this tie to the business? How can you explain that in a simple form? And it's really challenging for those who have really deep brains, to simplify things, because for them it feels like they're oversimplifying, it's like it's almost like devaluating the information. But what I try to coach the executives on is, the receiver is who you care about. It's not about you. It's how this information is being received, and is that person who you're trying to explain things to understanding? Because if they don't, they won't engage with you. They won't work with you. So distilling and guiding technical leaders specifically to be less geeky and more simple, I guess,
Mm.
is very challenging for them and for me to get them to that point. Yeah, and using the jargon, going in circles before making the point, those are the problems that I constantly see.
I come across this often, and it's not just with tech people. I think it's anyone that gets into that sort of expert space where they potentially even had the problem that they're solving for people, but they're so far removed from the time that they had the problem that they have this
Mm.
expert mindset, and getting back into the beginner mindset is really tough because there's all this experience in between and they
Yes,
just have to shift perspective. You're absolutely right.
yes. Honestly, I also encountered myself the same problem,
Yeah, and
because
me.
because if I call myself one thing, then I'm like, but I leave all this other thing behind that nobody's aware of. So I feel like sometimes have to cramp everything, and that is an overload of information. So I myself also have to constantly distill the message and test it out, what resonates, what works. When I go to networking events, I always test it out. Okay, does this, if I pitch myself this way, do people understand it? If I pitch it this way, what people understand, right?
Yeah,
What comes to their mind as the first thought, what I do, right? It's the expert problem, I guess.
absolutely. They call it the expert trap. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. So we've talked about companies in transition. Is there anything specific that you would advise uh, leaders to do during times of change in terms of their communication to maintain trust and also engagement and morale?
Yeah, so the transition period within the company is like a flip point, right? There's a
Mm.
lot of chaos that happens in transition stage, and I love cleaning up the chaos. I just love coming in and finding the gems, putting structure into place. So the transition is not only on a company level, it's also on a leadership level. It's when, for example, let's take a startup, right? It's when a startup is aiming to become that bigger company
Mm.
because it's going through this accelerated growth. The leader has to think about them not being entrepreneur anymore. They now have to elevate their own presence and become the CEO of the company and elevate their own authority to match that growth, to match that perception of the company itself. So during transition times, what happens often is the company is growing at accelerated pace. The workforce is growing at an accelerated pace. The processes become, convoluted, or there's lack of processes.
Mm.
Teams become a little bit more siloed. So all of that has to start to become more streamlined and structured. And a lot of times, the leaders whose goals, and this is not the wrong goal, is to continue growing the company, they neglect that that need for structure. They don't understand that the structure needed in order to support and allow for that growth to continue. So what happens often in this time is executives have to start, or leaders of the companies, they have to start thinking about executive communication programs in-house. How do they now translate where the company's heading to the rest of the growing team so that everybody's kind of on the same bandwagon? They're
Yeah.
all riding the same wavelength. They have to be transparent, because change brings a lot of friction. Sometimes you have to fix things that are broken and takes time. So there's a lot of frustration also that accumulates among employees and the growing teams. And leaders just have to be transparent. Look, it's broken right now. Stick with us. We will fix it. And there has to be obviously resources allocated. They have to understand that without allocating the resources, is going to continue. The problems will continue. So they have to be a bit more mindful, what they need to do, where they need to invest, so that the company, again, sustains that growth and continues that growth, but in a more streamlined and smoother manner. So those are the things, that I always advise to think about.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's one of the, having sort of led change projects and programs myself, what I see consistently is an underinvestment and an underappreciation of the soft part of change and the communication and all of that side of things. It's focusing on, processes are absolutely, you're right. Processes are important. That needs to be clear, but those softer side of things that, well, I don't even think they're soft. The communications is actually like critical. Don't, if you're not equipping your leaders with the ability to be able to convey things to people in a transparent, authentic, engaging way, you won't overcome that resistance, and you'll probably fan the flames of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and in the end, the internal issues become externally visible,
Yeah.
and impacting external experiences, be it customer experience, be it brand authority experience, right? So you have to fix the house inside first before you can tackle the impact, elevation outside of the organization. And when I work with companies and leaders, I look at the three P's: people, process, and presence. How are people working together? Who's interacting with who? How is the information flowing inside the organization? How do we remove those silos so that people are working towards the same goals? Do we even set the goals, for the teams? Because that becomes also a crucial part of the growth. You've reached a certain point. Now, how do we move the needle further? How do we measure ourselves so we move the needle further? So people, as one of the pieces is very important to me. And again, that humanizing, that engagement, humanizing the company internally is also reflective of how the company is being perceived externally. The processes, right? As I mentioned before, the second P is, a lot of times when companies are smaller, they do things ad hoc, a spreadsheet here and there, IT maybe works, maybe doesn't work, well, there's no problem, if it doesn't work, we'll figure it out. And the bigger the team gets, the more it becomes complex to track things, right? Through the spreadsheets, through the email. So now you have to think about IT infrastructure that supports the tools, that are needed for the collaboration, for being agile, for moving faster, for approving cycles to be faster, for visibility, to the leadership, to cross the functional teams as well, right? As to what is happening, within the organization. And then presence, obviously, that's a given word. Without fixing those things, you can't really fix the presence. You can do as much as you want externally, ad hoc way, but until you have the strategy, until you know what you're doing in a way that aligns with business, you can't really move the needle with a presence. And presence is everything encompassing. You have to elevate your leadership team now, through thought leadership, through PR initiatives. You have to look at your brand message and voice and tone and visual consistency across the board, not only on website, but also how your PowerPoints look when your sales team goes to the customer meetings. Are we all on the same template? Are we all telling the same story? So those are the three P's I look at: people, process, and presence.
And I had a question, and we may have just covered it, but one of the things that you say is that you help people to go from scrappy to world-class presence. You may have already covered some of the biggest shifts that are required to make that transition. Is there anything else that you haven't covered that you might want to cover here to help people understand what's involved and also how to move that needle?
Yeah, one of the biggest things is mindset shift. So leaders have to recognize that for them to be there, the aspirational goal that they have to build a brand equity, they have to work on their own mindset shift. We talked about, understanding that there's resources will be needed to allocate, will need to be allocated to support certain initiatives and to support cleanup of the house, so to say, or putting the right people in the right places. And that's one of the biggest challenges. How do they, and again, we probably didn't set the tone. I work within the sort of the architecture of communication and marketing department, right? So how do you then believe that this is a valuable thing to fix, and you have to have the right people in place and the right leader in that position to actually help you elevate and get the company to where it needs to be, with the right structure, with the right team members, in place within that department. And again, all the initiatives that are being presented. So that mindset shift is key. And a lot of times I have to coach and work and educate leaders, why, and show the metrics, right? So you're here right now. Let's set the goal of where you want to be. And here's how we are going to track the results of that goal that we set, for it to happen, we have to have resources. We have to have different initiatives, budget for initiatives that we need to support. So that would be one of the key things. And I mentioned earlier as well, it's having structure, a little bit more structure versus just trying things ad hoc, start having structure. Look, so I normally look for gaps and opportunities that are not filled. How can we elevate the company? What is going on inside the organization? This is my sort of prerequisite whenever I work with leaders. It's like phase one out of my 4-pillar, process. Pillar one is I just dive deep. I go interview the stakeholders. I talk to employees. I try to uncover all the problems, and then externally and internally, before we start coming up with a plan. So that's like a prerequisite. If you want to work with me, I will go deep. That's my journalistic approach. I will ask a ton of questions. I will have you fill out different questionnaires. I will be able to sort of understand what the business is all about, where it wants to go, and then see the opportunities that we need to, uncover.
Excellent. And I guess in a sense, we are talking a little bit more about brand presence in that scenario. I want to shift also then to another area that you support people on, which is executive presence. And I wondered if you would be able to make the distinction between executive presence and just being a confident speaker. What's the difference in your opinion, and how can someone develop that presence more?
Confidence helps with presence.
Okay.
If you're not confident, then it will be just more work to elevate your presence. But confidence is more internal. That's how I see it. You just have confidence to do things. You're not afraid to try things out. Presence is almost like an output, like external, sort of a representation of your presence, externally, right? How people are perceiving you. How do you walk in the room? Are you put together? How do you communicate? How do you handle yourself? And presence and present is kind of the twofold thing, right? When I work with executives, I coach them to be also present within the organization. What is their presence inside the organization? Are they detached? They have no idea what's going on? Are they too embedded where they're micromanaging, right? What's that level of presence that is comfortable, to continue leading the team? And what is overpowering where it's like, just leave us alone, go do your work, go do speaking engagements, we know what we're doing. So the presence is that how others are perceiving you. If let's say an employee is researching the company that they want to be hired in, right? I don't have the stats in front of me, but somewhere I read it that there's the amount of influence that the CEO or the leadership team has with their presence, digitally, also influences, if the employee feels that this company is trustworthy, do they want to join it, because they can read up about, okay, who is this leader, if there's enough information about him or her, then it builds that report in advance before they even submit the resume, right? So being present inside the organization and elevating your presence externally for executives is crucial, when the company starts growing, and even before that, depending, you have to exude a certain presence when you go and pitch, to investors, for example, right? Or when you go and talk to your customers. So each stage is a different layer of that presence. But it's how is your authority, what it is that you are all about.
Cool. That's helpful. And I think you're right. And we can certainly see, I guess, with the bigger companies, and not to sort of getting into any views on it, but how Elon Musk's transition has influenced the brand and whether people want to work for the organization or buy the products. And so I think it's not unrealistic to say that this is an important, even if you aren't, a big, huge company like Tesla, people do their research before they choose to work with you, and also buy from you, especially in the B2B space. It potentially has an impact. So I think you're right to flag this as something that people need to pay attention to.
Yeah, and recently I've been having a lot of conversations around the leadership presence, right? Because many years ago, and even right now, those larger organizations, more bureaucratic, or the ones that were established 30, 40 years ago, the culture and mindset, it's still old. Executives are behind the walls. They're not there to show their faces. They're not there to communicate. the younger organizations, and leaders of those organizations, they do understand the value of being more present out there, using PR strategies to get the voice out about them, by extension about the company, presenting on stage and doing all of these things, right? And obviously they're more open to having open door policy inside the organization as well. I'm not talking this as 100%, there's also personality. A lot of it is also personality, how people lead, right? Some of them, would prefer to stay behind the walls, and they would put somebody, more outspoken as the face of the company. And that's totally normal as long as it's agreed upon. But it's more, the perception externally, right? That's being given to people who let's say want to learn about the brand. How are these leaders? Who are they? Can I learn about them in advance? What does their LinkedIn feed look like? Are there any interviews published about them? Do they use video as a medium? Have they presented anything on stage? That gives that, rounded view about the presence and who they are and what the values are, I guess, as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's also there is also a potential danger here for some leaders in terms of, and I see this with people as speakers, having a perception sometimes of what a speaker should be like. That means that when they start speaking, they lose their personality to become this version of themselves that's not real. And I think there's this balance to be had between creating a presence, but in a way that is authentic and natural to you. And I wondered if you had any advice or opinion on that.
100%, Sarah, 100%. Sometimes, and I've seen those presentations on stage, especially, that's more prominent, where you talk to that person off stage, they go on stage like a completely different personality, completely different person. We're like, where was this person before? So obviously that gives indication that people are trainable. You can train yourself to be a very good speaker. The difference with camera is, though, you can't really cheat the camera, because camera exaggerates. Whenever there's a lot of fakeness, it just gives you tenfold of fakeness, So on camera, you have to find the real you, the real voice, and the way you communicate, the way you use your hands. Camera is just a completely different medium, So when I coach executives on camera, they sometimes would come in confident. Oh, I've done multiple speaking engagements, kind of very confident, I know what I'm doing. So I just stay quiet. We start working. They start sweating. Oh my God, what happened to me? I don't know what I'm doing, I said, yes, because camera is completely different. There's a layer of that, red record button that brings this mental block. And you have to now distill, you have to stay within the frame, you have to distill the information. You have only 2 minutes of the video, segment, and you have to be really precise in what you need to say. So to deliver authenticity on camera, I feel is more challenging, just because it's a different medium. And when you hear yourself, when people watch back themselves, they just hate themselves, right? So then it's another layer to unblock, to get this breakthrough, because now we have to work on getting comfortable, in hearing your voice, getting comfortable in seeing yourself, finding, the body language that works, hearing, catching yourself in the real environments, how you talk to the teams, how you talk to your colleagues, translating that through video as a medium. So being real is definitely important, Sarah. So yeah, I agree with you on that 100%.
That's really interesting, because I did have a question around the difference between on stage and on screen. I think you've just done a really good job of highlighting some of those issues. That's really cool. Yeah, and I mean, as an actor, I act on stage. I don't act on screen at the moment, and it's a complete, again, with acting, it's a completely different animal. Stage is bigger, and I think the same is speaking. You have to occupy the space on stage. Everything is bigger. The facial gestures can get laughs, but it would look really odd if you're doing the same thing in that little sort of space. It would just look like you probably something wrong with you.
Yeah, that's why, I think there are even famous actors, and I don't know their names, who've transitioned from being staged to, on camera
Right, yeah.
acting. And it's, even if you're a pro, it's still a challenge for them to make that transition, because as you just said, on stage, you have to be more animatic, more expressive, because you have this massive amount of audience, in this big hall, not hall, or I guess space, sitting
Yeah.
and watching you, and somebody in the far row has to have the same experience as somebody in the front row. And so
Yeah.
you have to be more expressive. You have to fill it in. On camera, it's just one-on-one consumption, People normally consume content, video content on the mobile, on the computers alone, not
Mm,
with groups of people. So you have
mm,
to connect with somebody, a single person,
mm.
alone, right?
Yeah.
Looking, listening to you. Yeah.
Excellent. That's really useful. Cool. Okay, now we've mentioned this a little bit about visual storytelling, which is one of your, key areas and key strengths. What are some creative ways that you can suggest that speakers can use visuals to make their talk more compelling?
Yeah, so there's stage speaking and there's video storytelling, right? So
Mm.
we can touch a little bit on both. On stage, obviously, people are tied to having what I call a security blanket, which is a PowerPoint presentation, right? They just have to have something on the screen displayed. Now, if we compare different types of, presentations, let's say TED Talk to a regular keynote, or, conference type of presentations, those are two completely different styles, right?
Mm.
TED Talk is just the PowerPoint is just for background, just
Yeah.
to make the speaker look good. The speaker is the storyteller. They describe, the journey. They describe, through different pauses and inflections of the voice, the message that they're trying to convey. Now, if you're an executive, an entrepreneur, leader, and you're presenting on stage, obviously, most of the time, I should say, obviously, most of the time you will be using the PowerPoint, right? So it is important to not rely on that PowerPoint with a lot of words. Your words have to come out of your mouth. They should not be sitting on the PowerPoint. So the PowerPoint is there just as a cue, and you know that more than anybody, because you coach people, on speaking engagements, on speaking stage speaking. You use your PowerPoint only for as a cue, what your next message is. And let's say if it's a very technical message, what I advise usually is to distill technicality into simple visual sort of sequence of the story, right? Be it with
Mm.
icons and sort of a word accompanying the icon, or like a design something that would tell that story,
Mm.
visually while you're
Mm.
speaking it on stage. So that's, for stage type of presentations. And obviously everything that we talked before, in terms of clarity of the communication, you have to not use any jargon, distill that information, be clear on what you're saying. And again, on stage, when you speak on stage, and actually it's the same advice even on camera, use voice inflections,
Yeah.
pauses, don't be afraid of the silence. You don't need
Mm.
to rush through things, just to get it out of your brain and out of your mouth. Give yourself those pauses, because we have to remember that our audiences don't know the information that we know.
Yes.
So they're listening and trying to digest it at the same time, maybe take notes, right? Remember it. So we have to give them space to digest that information, and not just rush through the bullet points that we have, on our script to deliver. Nobody knows those bullet points but you. If you miss
Yeah.
one bullet point, that's not a problem. The audience didn't even know it existed. so,
Yeah.
so you really don't have to worry about that part.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think this is a really important point, certainly about the pause, but also just understanding that when you are, and I guess this also can apply on camera, if I'm asking a barrage of questions, it's going to overwhelm the audience in both mediums. But also, what I also find when speakers ask questions of the audience, if you are asking them a question or painting a future, they need to go into their mind, to their memory banks, to consider how they actually feel about the question. And if you just go straight on, then you're going to rob them of that opportunity to consider, which is what you actually want them to do. So I think that's a really strong point that you made just then. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And on camera, sometimes that silence may feel very awkward, because like I touched earlier, airtime is expensive. So when people are quiet on camera, it feels like it just brings more stress than on stage, because on stage you can pause, but allow yourself to walk, look at the audience, right? You kind of engage differently. On camera, if you pause, it feels like you don't know what you're talking about sometimes because you're thinking too long, right? It might feel this way, but it's not. And yes, on camera, equally important to use your hands, use voice inflections, use facial expressions, again, keeping in mind the sensitivity that camera translates, right?
Definitely. Definitely. That's
Yeah.
cool. Okay, now something I read about you, which is quite interesting. It's you've produced over 300 video stories, which is quite a lot. And tell me a bit more about the video stories and how you approach those to get maximum engagement and impact.
So any project, any video story requires understanding of the goals of what we're trying to achieve with it, right? Where does it fit in the marketing funnel? Is it supposed to educate? Is it supposed to inform? Is it supposed to sell? What it is that we're trying to do with that video story, first of all. Then, and what I've done as a video producer actually is part of the process I go through in any level of the project, because you can't really produce a story if you're not prepared. So there's three stages, if I may educate. There's three stages in video storytelling. So it's pre-production, which is preparation, right? You try to understand, involve all the stakeholders, figure out, okay, what we're doing, what we're saying, what's the message, what's the goal. Then you build out sort of, okay, for me to reach this goal, I have to have XYZ people giving interviews on camera, and that's the pieces that they will cover, to build that story fully out. So now that we have people, ready to be on camera, where are we filming all of this? Is it on location? Do we go to studio? Is it a teleprompter? Is it an interview style? What is it? What is the setup? What kind of vibe are we wanting to exude with this story, with this visual, right? So you prepare all of that, and then you go into production day. So production, you have a plan, you know exactly what you're doing, boom, 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 you capture the interviews, or you record, the teleprompter version scripts, you capture some visuals, on site. I'm referencing a more elaborate sort of production here. You kind of capture supplementally complementary visuals to support that story, be it product, imagery, be it office environment, employee environment, whatever that story is. So that's production day. And where everything is being put together is post-production, right? So now it's in the magic hands of the editor to weave everything together, put the flow of the story from different interviews, lay over the visuals, add music, add all the bells and whistles, so that when you see the final output, it's a wow output. And so it's preparation, production, and then follow-up kind of thing, so, and obviously once you have the video, we have to start thinking about, how do I market it? Where do I put it? What are the channels of distribution? Who does it need to reach? How are we going to optimize it? Can we dissect it into different mini stories, to lead to the full stories for social, right? So then the strategy, the implementation comes and plays the role. Is that helpful? Is that what you wanted to kind of
absolutely
understand?
No, it's good. It's sort of making me think about some stuff. I love the idea of, the pre-production, the story. It's almost like storyboarding. I think of it in terms of the creative arts, if that sort of thing, but storyboarding and getting it all clear. And it's just made me think, I've been seeing a lot on LinkedIn recently. I'm assuming it's a global consultancy company, and they've been running video ads on LinkedIn that are kind of positioned as interviews with founders and very senior C-suite of the company. And I was curious about, that approach, because it got to the point where I was like, oh my goodness, if I see this woman again, because but it's not just like putting it together, but it's how do we put it out there? And they're doing very well. They're getting a ton of engagement, and I can see the sort of views and the comments. Obviously, it's a paid promotion, but even so, but I love that. I think that's a really clear process that people can apply to something large or even something small, and that and also paying attention to the B-roll, which is, you talked about the sort of background, the product, and all of that sort of thing. Even if you're a speaker creating a show reel, what Loreta's just gone through is a great way to approach putting your show reel together, and
Yes,
as well as any sort of company video. So thank you for sharing. That's very thorough.
of course,
Yeah,
of course,
cool.
not a problem.
I want to ask you one question last question before we go into the standard questions. What's one unconventional technique that you swear by that you've seen work to help executives level up their, I'm going to focus on the screen presence more than the stage presence here.
I try to educate them to really get to understand themselves better. What is their true personality that we need to translate? Not their projected executive sort of mode, but what it is that's in their hearts, right?
Yeah.
Who are they here that we need to extract and translate? And that's where that camera, authenticity it becomes very, very important. Because to your point that we discussed earlier, sometimes we put on a face, we put on a voice, that we want to project, almost like a fake energy to it, versus truly being real. Because humanization for me is one of the key things when I work, with organizations. I always look at the human, I always look at the person, and I always want to extract that humanity, that true nature of the person on camera, because that's the only way you can sell, is when you're truly real. You meet people, meet and assess you on camera first before they meet you, and you're exactly the same person. If people meet me in person, I'm exactly the same. I use a lot of gestures. I sometimes speed when I talk, and I need to slow down, and I know that. But that's what people get. If they can keep up with me, then we're good. So that, understanding your own energy, your own sort of what you truly are, is what usually helps in translating through the camera lens.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I was going to say, I can absolutely keep up with you, but any listener on the podcast, you can absolutely down tick the setting to play us at 0.75 or something if we're going a bit fast for you. So that's cool. Smashing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that really useful, advice and tips and insight to how we can level our presence, how we can influence change in organizations and more positively, all sorts of really useful stuff there. Now I'm going to come to in a little bit how people can find out more about you and working with you. Before I do that, I have some standard questions that I'd like to ask. First one being, what's the best thing that speaking has done for you?
I think building my own authority, and presence, actually, because that's the advice I always give executives as well. Get out there, even if you're not comfortable, get out there. Because that just builds that digital imprint,
Yeah.
and gives exposure to you. So building my own authority and presence is probably the best outcome.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And now we can extend this to back when you started in TV, if you like. Has there been a speaking gig or anything where it hasn't gone to plan and you thought, oh my goodness, I just want to forget about that? Does that happen to you,
Yes.
Loretta?
Oh my God. When I was a news anchor, probably my first year of anchoring the national news, or maybe the first year, I think. Usually when you put this news show together, you put as an anchor, sequences and blurbs into a teleprompter, right? And the teleprompter broke one day.
Oh no.
And I remember I'm like, oh no. My papers are all shuffled because I was not following, the printed versions along with the teleprompter. So everything was kind of like not in the sequence. So I started shuffling through the papers, and I was like blank stare on live TV. I was dying. I would never want to repeat that emotion or experience that emotion again in my life. It was mortifying. I thought I was gonna die, So that was a scary moment for me, especially being so early on in your career to experience that big flop on live, air. Oh my God. It's just, I even right now, I get like anxiety, my heart is palpitating just thinking about it.
How did you get out of it? Did someone cut to something or?
Yeah, so I scrambled. I read something in the end. I don't even think it was the right intro to the report. But they cut to the report, and then in the meantime, I shuffled, my papers and found the next right one that I needed to read off of the
Oh my
paper.
goodness. Still
So
got
the lesson there
PTSD.
learned was, yeah, but the lesson there learned was that know your story. We all know the story, but we sometimes rely on the paper or on assistance, right, of some sorts, thinking, oh, it's going to be there. I'll just read it, or I'll just look at the paper and it's going to be there. But then it's not in your head. And it was not in my head. I did not internalize that particular day's, show flow, and I just got lost because I'm like, well, what's the story here that I'm introducing? I mean, I knew the report. I just couldn't get the words out of it because I was relying on the words on the teleprompter, and when I coach executives, I tell them, look, you built the company, or you are running the company. You know how it all started. You don't need to read it off the paper, you know the story. So my job is to help them extract that story, help articulate it as clearly as possible, because we don't need to rely on papers. Now, there's versions, obviously, there's opportunities when script is needed, when the teleprompter is a must. Let's say it's an important, let's say reputation management, or an important message to be delivered from legal perspective, where you can't really, ad hoc the words. They have to be very precise, right? So then the teleprompter obviously is the way to go, but it's a different type of coaching for the teleprompter.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to have. I see this often as well with speakers, and I've worked with people who are pitching for funding and stuff like that, and their presentation was still like it was about their lived experience, which they knew, but it was only when they switched into Q&A that they sort of their natural self was coming through. So it was trying to coach them to say, look, like this is a presentation, but it's your story. Like even if we miss some words, it's still your story. And I want you to have that same, comfort and natural storytelling
Energy.
in the main body as in the Q&A. It was almost like the switch went off, and it's like I can now be me.
And I think it's psychological. It's psychological because people feel that they have to perform.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
now I'm performing a presentation. Now I'm performing a message, right?
Yeah.
They're not thinking I'm telling a story. They're thinking I'm performing. When you're performing, you're not authentic. You're acting. You know better than anybody else, right? Because you do that. You have to get into a character. So what they need to understand, people who want to be on camera on stage, they are the character. They don't need to be somebody else. They are the character. They just have to be comfortable with themselves to express that character, And sometimes it's more easy to just answer the question than have an official, presentation flow, right? It's a slightly different dynamics. When I coach people to read the teleprompter, it's completely different than when I ask them the question on camera, because question is just more like information gathering, conversational, whereas teleprompter or stage, when you have a flow, it feels like you have to go through that flow very precisely, which then turns into a little bit of that performance, and now I have to kind of be very put together. I have to know what I'm saying, and I have to be very clear and precise on what I'm saying, versus more casual. So yeah, to your point, we have to find that balance, help them find that balance.
Yeah, and I think just a point for any stage speakers here, where we can bring in performance is like there are performance skills that we can apply, some choreography, some body language, some voice work, but it's not you performing. It's like some things that we add in to bring your storytelling to life that don't replace your personality. And I think that's really an important thing. So yeah, that's cool.
Amplifying and sort of complementing who they are by adding those additional layers, making them basically better.
Exactly. Cool. Right. Next question. What's the book that's had most influence on you and why?
Way back when I was still, I'm trying to think, I think in my early days, the university, when I was studying journalism, I was introduced to Paulo Coelho book, Alchemist.
Oh, yes.
And back then when I read it, I remember being fascinated because that was probably my first introduction to personal growth type of book, something that's metaphysical, something that's not on the ground. And I remember reading it and I could not quite comprehend the feeling it was giving me because I was so green. I was like, somebody said read it, and I read it, and I was reading, and I'm like, I don't quite comprehend this book. And actually the other day I was thinking I need to read it right now as an adult, like a mature adult, because a lot of years have passed since I read it, and I read it in Lithuanian. I would read it in English. And it just opened that door for me to seek this type of information moving forward, through my life, because I just could not explain the feeling it gave me. It just felt very good, and I just wanted more of it.
Yeah, that's great. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes. It's a lovely book, and it is often
Yeah.
a gateway book
Yeah.
into a different way of looking at life, which is really
Yeah.
cool. Thank you for that. Okay, next question is, what's the best bit of business advice you've had and why?
I'm a planner by nature, so I always tell people to plan, and set goals, right? What it is that you want to achieve, and when it comes to, let's say, allocating resources to help you out in your business, don't start looking for those resources at the moment of need. Start looking and assessing, oh, will this resource be needed a year from now, in my business? Should I talk to this person right now? I always look myself about 2 years ahead. When I work with companies, I see where they're at, but I kind of know where they should be about 2 years in advance. So with that in mind, I start building, like, mapping out what, resources might need to be allocated or hired or brought on board to achieve certain things down the road. So don't look for resources when you need them. Start sort of building that, not portfolio, but resource library, I guess, or people in your network, that you can tap into, through every stage, of your business.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you for that. That's a really good point. Looking to you. That's a long way. Most people don't do that. So that's interesting.
Yeah,
That's
it's
cool.
difficult sometimes to see, what's going to be 2 years ahead. Sometimes we don't know what's going to be a month ahead,
Yeah.
But if you know where you're headed, if you know where you want to be, it's easier to imagine, it's easier to envision, and kind of, in a way, you're setting your mind to get there too, right? And
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in, mind work as well, right? How
Yeah.
your mind actually helps you get there, through the steps that you will take along the way to get.
Definitely. Definitely. That's really cool. Okay, last question.
Mhm.
If you could have one mentor, and they can be alive or dead, fictional or non-fictional, who would you choose and why?
I would not know the name, but I know that what I would want out of them. And that would be, somebody guiding me and teaching me along the way how to become a more efficient and effective business person. Because I did not grow up here. I did not grow up in the United States. I grew up in Lithuania. When I moved here and started my own business, I honestly didn't know what I was doing. I was just like, okay, well, I'm gonna try this because people say I should be doing this, so I'm gonna try it. And then it kind of stuck because I realized, okay, I'm good at it, specifically video, storytelling and coaching people on camera. But then when I started working in a corporation, I saw so many opportunities for growth within the organization. And people, in those big organizations, they keep talking, find a mentor, find a sponsor in another department who can vouch for you. And I remember sitting there thinking, well, how the heck do I find one? Like, where are they? Isn't it your HR job to kind of build this program and assign people, So I really dislike the idea that's being said, find a mentor. It's not easy, first of all, because that mentor has to have it in him or her to mentor you. It's their time, their knowledge that they have to transfer. And I remember I was pursuing several people inside the organization, like Blaine asking, would you be my mentor? And like, I have no time. Well, what do you want out of this? And of course I didn't have clear idea then yet, had I had an idea, but I was like, somebody told me to get a mentor. I'm looking for a mentor right now. Who wants to be my mentor? Um, but I know that, if I had gotten certain coaching earlier in my career, I would probably have achieved, my goals more effectively and more precisely, I guess, because a lot of what I'm doing and have been doing is, trial and error, right? That's also part of the journey. You kind of try it out, you fail, or you find a mistake, or you find what works, and you continue trying, right? But with a mentorship, it feels like you can get there faster because their knowledge is now ingested into your brain, and you just have to apply that knowledge into your situation. So, I committed this year to actually working with a business coach, which is, it's not the same as mentor, but somebody who I can bounce ideas off of, who has more knowledge than I do. And I look at it as an investment. It's like, how can I get myself faster to where I want to be, with somebody listening to me, understanding my business, understanding my story, understanding what I'm all about, helping sort of shape my path. So it's not just me, figuring it out on my own. It's a huge value to have somebody who can actually help you.
I think that's fair. It's I think it's seeing it as an investment. It's a shortcut. And effectively what you're paying for with a coach is, as long as you pick the right one for the right job, is time saving, overwhelm, saving stress, to avoid some of the pitfalls, and also that guiding hand or guiding, light to help you sound out ideas as well, like you said, because it can be quite a lonely journey as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as a speaker, and it's great to have a sort of a voice to help you, measure what you're doing and find out if you're doing the right thing and so on, that compass. But yeah, that's cool. Well, I hope if you haven't found the person yet, I hope you find the right one to help you get where you get to.
Thank you. Thank you.
2 years down the road.
Exactly. I know where I want to be 2 years from now. So I just need to get there right now.
Excellent. Well, Loreta, thank you so much for coming onto the show and sharing your story and your tips and tools and insight and opinion on all of this really important stuff for people. If someone has heard something they like, a company or an individual, where should they go to find out more about what you're up to and to potentially hire you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for this platform, and thank you for asking these thoughtful questions. I live, so to say, on LinkedIn. So if people want to reach out after listening to this podcast and say, hey, I heard you on Sarah's podcast, I'll accept the invitation. I post, content regularly there, at least once per week is my commitment to myself. And if you want to schedule a call with me, you can find me on my website, loreta.today. Loreta is spelled with one T and one R, .today. I also have a presence questionnaire still up there, which I'm planning to take down and repurpose in different ways, where people can download the questionnaire and take company and executive presence assessment, and then it gives the score and shows the gaps where they need to to work on. So that's a good tool, for them to kind of look at it and reach out to me if they want anything to get fixed.
Cool. And we'll put all of those links in the show notes as well, so you can shortcut your way to contacting Loreta. Well, again, thank you so much for your time today, for being so generous. And it's been a real pleasure having a chat with you today and seeing someone who is extremely authentic. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Likewise, I appreciate the platform.
There you go. I hope you got some value from this episode. I know I had a blast actually talking to Loreta. She's what you call in the UK a WYSIWYG, which stands for what you see is what you get. Completely authentic and funny. I think she must be a joy to work with. And if you have got some value, picked up a tip or two from Loreta, do go and let her know. You can connect with her on LinkedIn. If you want to work with her, have a look at her website. The link is in the show notes for that. And yeah, also I'm available on LinkedIn to connect with, to get in touch with. Love to hear from you. Also, if you're watching the channel on YouTube, first of all, thanks so much. And if you want to leave a comment below, let us know the biggest thing you took away. That'd be amazeballs. And if you are watching but haven't subscribed yet, well, get on and do that. And for those of you that have, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And if you're listening to the show on any of the Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, or a podcast app, then if you would leave a rating or review for the show, that would be fantastic too. And you can also do that over at ratethispodcast.com/TSC. So thanks so much again for choosing to watch or listen to the show. It's been a pleasure being with you as ever. And until next time, you know what I'm going to say. Go out, grab your life by the nuts, and get cracking. Bye-bye. It's a nightmare. You're an expert with so much to say, but now that you've been booked to speak, you're struggling to know exactly what to talk about. You want a talk that engages the audience and wins you new clients without you losing your personality or anyone feeling pitched to. But what happens when you sit down to create that talk is that you end up staring at a blank page for ages, or worse, surrounded by hundreds of sticky notes with content that you could include. With so much material, you just don't know where to start or finish. Don't worry, because many experts like you face exactly the same challenge, and that's why I created the Blank Page to Stage Guide. In just 50 minutes, this breakthrough resource is going to help you identify the big idea of your message, make it relatable for the audience that you're speaking to, and convey it all in a way that gets the audience inspired and on board with your idea. And it works even if you have tons of material or your subject feels less than exciting. If you want to cut through swathes of content and get a talk that you're excited to share, your audience loves, and wins you new clients, then grab your Blank Page to Stage Guide from saraharcher.co.uk/new-guide-TSC. Oh, I forgot to say, it's completely free. Enjoy!